Happy Monday, everybody. My name is Scott Morganroth of Motor City Madmouth, and we have a great sports exchange on tap. I'm very pleased to be joined by my regular partner, George Eichhorn. George, welcome back. We're going to
Good to be back and looking forward to the tonight show, Scott.
And our special guest, Jerome Jurenovich. If you haven't heard of him, which I'm sure a lot of people probably have, here's a man well-traveled, but one of his biggest acts was over at CNN Sports. Welcome to the show, Jerome. We appreciate you being on.
Gentlemen, good to be with you. Let's have some fun, huh?
Oh, we're going to do that. There's a lot of experience on this show, that's for sure. But before we go into some of the questions, though, I want to pass on our deepest condolences to Chris Roberts, who passed away at the age of 74. He had a stroke as well as Parkinson's disease. He was a sportscaster in LA for 23 years and was a voice of UCLA sports. And I had the opportunity to get to know Chris the last several years and went out there for the Southern California sports casters banquet, and I got to know him, and he taught me a lot. So since I have a great sportscaster on there like you, Jerome, I wanted to make sure I pass my deepest condolences to Chris as well. All right, you said one of the best stories I've ever seen, especially knowing it didn't relate to a tie. But so first of all, how did you get your start, Jerome, in the business? And tell us how you got to Atlanta. I know you told me that you were in LA for 4 years and Denver too, and you were in Erie.
Yeah, I started in Erie, Pennsylvania, grew up outside of Pittsburgh. And, when you're a Western PA boy where your father and your uncles and all your neighbors and everybody works in the steel mill, and you're growing up in the 70s, you grow up on Clemente Stargell and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I went to college in Erie, Pennsylvania, graduated from, it's now Gannon University. It was just a college then. It was a Division II school, Catholic school, small, pretty good basketball program, though, for its size. Played Cheney State and Philly and all those type of schools. Made it to the national championship a couple times. Went there to study communications. To be honest with you, I started because I wanted to produce television commercials. I was one of those kids that grew up on TV. If it wasn't out in the yard or out in the street playing ball, I was inside watching TV, not one for the books. And I always had this weird element to my mind. I would watch commercials, even as like a 10, 12, 14-year-old kid, try to figure out what was the message. Obviously, they're trying to sell you Cheerios or tires, but are they trying to sell to a certain demographic? And what are they trying to differentiate their product from their competitors? I know that was really weird for a young man, but I did. So I thought that's exactly what I would do. In my senior year, I was fortunate enough to get a job at the local CBS station in Erie and started doing local car commercials, those types of things. And I quickly realized that, when you use your creativity and then you're back to carry that camera and the tripod and edit everything together, the only person making any money is the salesman. So out the window goes commercial production. And one day they said, "Hey, what are you doing Sunday?" I said, "What do you need?" "We're down a camera guy. Can you run down the Three Rivers and shoot video and do post-game interviews for the Steelers game?" And next thing I know, it's a Sunday afternoon, beautiful skies, September. Steelers are beating the Bengals. I'm in the locker room. There's Bradshaw, there's Stallworth, there's Franco, there's Jack Lambert. And I'm sitting there going, these guys are my heroes. And I get to hang out in this room. How do you get paid for this on a full-time basis? And that's when I went back to Erie. The next day, I told the news director, I got to get in the sports department. And next thing you know, I was in there. Erie had the benefit, third largest city in Pennsylvania. However, because a third of the broadcast signal went out over Lake Erie into Canada, the Nielsen ratings don't indicate households in Canada. So even though it was the third largest city population-wise, it was only market 140. So as you can imagine, nobody made any money, and there was always a lot of turnover, which was great for young people like myself. The beauty of Erie was we were an hour and a half from Rich Stadium, maybe an hour and 40 minutes from Cleveland Stadium, and 2 hours and 20 minutes from Three Rivers. So Friday night high school football, Saturday you're doing whatever you can do to pirate, major college football games off of the massive satellites at the time. And on Sundays, I'm 21, 22 years old, and I'm covering the Steelers, Browns, or Bills every Sunday while most people are still rehashing what happened on Friday Night Football football. I'm talking to Joe Ferguson or Terry Bradshaw or the beginning of the Bernie Kosar career. It was very, very unique and well rewarding position that really paid dividends much later on down the line. Did that for a couple years. As you guys know, our business never really paid all that much in the 70s and 80s. So you're out of college. And broadcasting, you're working Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve. You don't get holidays off because the TV's always on. And I realized I'm making $11,000 a year. I have 2 nickels to rub together. I have a week's vacation coming up. I don't have a girlfriend. What am I going to do? I hadn't seen my best friend and his wife since I stood up as a groomsman in their wedding the prior summer. So I just drove down to Atlanta. He moved to Atlanta. I drove 11 hours in the car, drove down to Atlanta to hang out with him and his wife and check out Atlanta. Next day, we go to church. I'm looking across the sacristy and I see this young face. And I'm like, I know that kid. He was an intern in Erie a year before and he was working at CNN radio. And I asked him, I said, Micah Johnson, Micah, let me know if they have anything down there. That night, he went to work Sunday night, called me, said, there's 2 openings in the sports department. My career, fellas, is always right place, right time, pure luck. The Lord was looking out for me. So he goes, call this number tomorrow and tell him that you know me and I'm an anchor at CNN Headline News. So I did just that. And this young lady gets on the phone and she says, hold on. And I'm on hold for like 5 minutes. And I'm about to hang up. It's a Monday, late morning. And she calls up. She goes, can you come in today for an interview? I said, today? She goes, yes. Can you be here at 2:00? I said, I can be there at 2, but I'm on vacation. I don't have a suit. I don't have a resume. I don't have a resume tape. I mean, the nicest clothes I have are khaki pants and a golf shirt. She's like, hold on, with this voice of disgust. You can just hear it. And I'm on hold for like 3 minutes. She says, the boss says, don't wear cutoff jeans and a tank top and he'll see you too. And the man that interviewed me was the late, great Bill McPhail, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Bill McPhail was the very first president of CBS Sports. His brother and his father both named Lee McPhail, Lee Sr. and Lee Jr. Both of them at one point in their career were president of the Yankees and then elevated to president of the American League. Yeah. Lee Jr. was the one that made the infamous pine tar decision. Remember when George Brett hit the ball and they threw him out and he reversed it? Oh my gosh. And Bill used to have a bat, an authentic George Brett bat, game used in his office all the time. And it had the pine tar on there and everything. Lee came to visit him one day and Bill's out to lunch and Lee McPhail Jr., former president of the American League, is just sitting in Bill McPhail's office all by himself. I go in there, huge office. I'm talking, Mr. McPhail, pleasure to meet you. And I grab the bat out of, because I'm nervous and I'm swinging the bat. And I look up and it says, George Brett. And there's George Brett and Lee McPhail. And I wanted to ask him so badly, what were you thinking? But I couldn't do it. And Bill basically hired me on the spot. Really? And 15 years later, I had a unique sign off, which when I was doing Headline Sports, we were the first network in the country to have the crawl of the scores on the bottom of the screen. But that wasn't until my last 2 years there. So for my first 13 years, if you wanted a score of a ball game across the country, the only way you could get it was to watch CNN Headline Sports at 20 after and 50 after. And that was from, it was all day, but people would watch the local news. The games would start at 7. They tune on 7:20, 7:50, 8:20, 8:50 until Sports Center at 11 or CNN Sports Tonight at 11. Yeah. And, myself and one or two other guys had unique names, unique deliveries, and they were almost embedded in sports fans of that generation in their mindset. So I still run into a lot of guys our age and they know the name right away. People used to ask me, did you make that name up? I'm like, are you kidding me? How do you make a name like that up? But, CNN went through its issues at the time. Time Warner bought them and it was okay. And then AOL bought Time Warner. AOL was ahead of the curve. Unfortunately, they made a major mistake. They bought it for all the streaming material. They needed content, but they did it 20 years earlier and they overpaid. So they had to start slashing. They got rid of sports. And next thing I know, I'm just calling around and Fox Sports hires me out in LA for 4 years. And while I'm out there, Altitude Sports in Denver was just starting up. And I went to a going away party for one of the producers at Fox Sports who had come from Denver. And he pulled me aside. He goes, you want to get back into TV on camera? And I said, yeah. And he goes, give me your tape before I leave town next Tuesday. Just stick it in my mailbox. Next thing I know, they're flying me up on that Friday, and they hired me on the spot to be the main anchor. And we covered the Avalanche and the Nuggets. Stan Kroenke owned it, still does. And Stan was great to work with. You know, I mean, he owns, I think, Manchester United over there in Premier League. Of course, he owns the Rams, Avalanche. It's the Ball Center now. It used to be Pepsi Center. Indoor, outdoor lacrosse. He was partnered with John Elway for the Arena Football League. He owned like 12 sports teams. He's a sports fanatic. And the best part about him is after the game, we'd sit in the bar in the arena and we would just sit there and talk about, he loves the NBA. We would just sit there and talk about the Nuggets. I used to tell him, get rid of Andre Miller. You got 5 thoroughbreds and he's walking it up the court. And he goes, Andre's a good point guard, Jerome. I said, he is a good point guard. But he's like an old man. He just walks up the court, run. Why do you think Showtime was so successful? And, of course, 2 years after I left, they ended up getting rid of Andre Miller, and then they start doing really well. Stan, I knew what I was talking about. And I was out there for a couple of years in Atlanta, Fox at the time. Now it's Bally. Fox Sports South decided they wanted to start all the Fox regionals. They're going to do pre- and post-game for their teams. And everybody knew the Braves. They loved the Braves down here. Next to college football, Braves are the second most popular team. Everybody knows the NBA. And not one person here knew anything about hockey. They didn't know a blue line from a red line. I'm out there with Rob Blake and Joe Sakic and all these guys that won the Stanley Cup twice, a couple Hall of Famers. And they looked at me and they're like, you're hired. And first year there, Thrashers win the division. Everybody's ecstatic. Next year there, Thrashers do a yard sale, got rid of all their good players, and 2 years later, Thrashers leave town. I'm like, what? Wow. But stuck around with the Braves and Hawks for a total of 15 years, and I hit 62. And I said, that's enough, you know, that's enough. From nights and weekends for 40 years, I got out of it a little earlier. They wanted to keep me, and I said, no, can't do it, fellas. My wife has been nagging at me to live a normal lifestyle, you know, Friday and Saturday nights off. And it was well worth it. You know, in the last 4 years, I've been to 16 countries. So we've been doing a lot of traveling.
Man, you look fantastic. So let me go over, you alluded to it, Jerome. So you talked about your list of employers, you know, Valley Sports South, which you talked about your Braves and Hawks stuff, the altitude in Denver. I told you I had a friend of mine that actually lives there. Then Fox Sports Radio, and then CNN Sports Anchor and WSE TV. So I guess as I list all your places that you've gone, describe each situation and how you grew with each one.
Well, let's start at the beginning. And here's Erie, Pennsylvania. Here's a guy that just loved television. When they first hired me, they hired me to be a news cameraman, one of the ENG guys. You go out to shoot the accidents, the fires, city council, so forth. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what I was doing day one. I would literally go home. This was back in the VCR days. And I would set my VCR to record ABC, NBC, and CBS. Now, this was pre-Fox. So, and it was also pre-cable. You know, 1982, 83, Erie did not have cable TV. Wow. So what I would do is I would watch how each of the network news shows, nightly news shows, would present their story. And I would watch the different camera angles that were used in the 3 different networks, how they approached each story differently, how their camera people were different from each other. And I was one of those amateur 35 millimeter guys. So I knew how to work a camera. I knew depth of field, angles, so forth. And I just learned from mimicking people that knew what they were doing. And next thing you know, you're in a locker room. And I always thought that was the easiest thing to interview an athlete because we love sports. The only thing you had to get over was being intimidated by the fact that, my God, that's Terry Bradshaw. He won 4 Super Bowls, but he's still a human being, and as long as you don't degrade the guy and insult the athlete, they're going to have bad days. And most of them are stand-up guys, and they address the issues. But more often than not, if you ask them a positive question, they truly respond. And the game, the strategy of the game. We all grew up watching it. So you already know what went wrong and what went right in the third quarter or fourth quarter on that final drive, or maybe the last 2 minutes of an NBA game, or, what happened to the starting pitcher in the sixth inning, why you didn't pull him earlier, why'd you leave him as long, or whatever, you learn by asking questions. And in a small market like that, you make your mistakes. I'm not above making mistakes. I made my mistakes, but that's how you learn. And then, I was pretty good by the time I left Erie. And then, usually at CNN, they were hiring people from major markets, Dallas, Cleveland. They couldn't afford to take people away from New York and LA or Chicago, but, Miami, Kansas City, Houston. And I'm like, this is this kid from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I was bottom of the ladder, but you got to start somewhere, right? And that's okay. I do want to tell you before I go any further, and I don't want to sidestep your question. Yeah, you know what? I'll get back to that. Remind me about my best moment in Erie. So anyway, there, Erie, CNN was very interesting. A funny little side note to this story is it was basically almost like radio is now. Headlines was run on computer cue tones, even though the on-air talent, I hate to use that word talent, but they do it in TV, even though the on-air broadcaster was live, it was very regimented. In local news, you're watching the 6 o'clock news. If the weather guy goes 30 seconds long, they usually tell the sports guy in the commercial, hey, go 30 seconds shorter. They can adjust. But on cue tone, it is set by computer. So at exactly, 20 minutes after the hour, the music and the video for the beginning of the headline sports was going to roll. And you had, it lasted about 5-6 seconds. Then you start talking. I'm Jerome Jurenovich, CNN Headline Sports, and you did your thing. Wow. And you had, during the week, you had a minute. It was a minute 42 to a minute 47. Couldn't go longer. Right. Nothing worse than saying Jerome Jurenovich and cut off because you went too long. You sound like an idiot, correct? Right. So I wasn't that efficient in radio, and the other guys were did a little bit of both, and they were more experienced. So I was petrified I was going to go too long. So I kept rushing through my report, and I kept finishing too short. It was like a minute 38, and they're looking at me in the control room like, you got to keep talking. I know it's only 9 seconds, but it sounds like 9 minutes, on television. Yeah. So the next time I went down there, I said, oh my goodness, I'm never going to let that happen again. So what do? I do the same thing. I come up like 9 seconds short, but when I go to say my name, I go, Jerome Jurenovich, CNN Headline Sports. I dragged it out for 6 seconds. Everybody, and it was a minute 45. It was perfect. Everybody in the control room is laughing. It's not going on the mic. I could see them through the glass. They are laughing at me. And I walk out into the newsroom, and a couple of the male, most of the writers were women. There were a couple of guys there, one of them played football with John Carroll in Cleveland. They were like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And I went upstairs, and the guys in the sports department were all over me. Men are. They're just crushing me. And I said, you know what? I did that one time, and like 40 different people reacted. And I'm sure there's probably like 500,000 people probably heard that. I guarantee you half of them were laughing too. So I just started doing it that way every single time. And, most of the guys would say, Mark McKay, CNN Headline Sports. And that's fine. They would just do it real professional. And I just dragged it out. And about 3 months in, I'm just sitting there at my desk, getting ready to go into the control room and do my thing. And who comes walking by but Ted Turner? And he looks at me and he goes, young man, I like the way you say your name. And I'm sitting there going, that's total validation, man. Anybody can make fun of me all they want, but the big guy likes it. I am never stopping. And that's because it was unique. First of all, I had a unique name to begin with. Most people in our business back in the day, they would have like a 3-syllable name, like a Mark McKay, Jim Daniels. It was always like 1 syllable and then 2, or 2 and then 1. They were all fake names, of course. And I'm like, no, man, I'm keeping it, because in cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh and Cleveland and, that Rust Belt and the industrial Northeast, there are so many people from different countries in Eastern Europe that came over, on the boat. Whether you're Italian or German, Slovak, Croatian, like me, it didn't matter. and they needed somebody to relate to. Not everybody could be, Bill Smith and, Jim Johnson. So that was another reason why I kind of caught on in popularity. And to be honest with you, I probably would have stayed there. But when the Time Warner and an AOL thing started, they just started chopping heads. It didn't matter who you were. And at that point, I said, well, they came in one day and they said, all of you guys are fired. Then they called me up the next morning. They said, well, we didn't realize what all you did, because I was doing for 4 different networks. And they said, can you come back? We'll keep you on for anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, and we'll pay you time and a half every day. And I said, okay. So I went back and I started looking right away. And about 2 months later, my cousin who was working, he was a record promoter, music promoter in the record industry. Right. And we were just chatting. And I told him what was going on. He said, email me your resume, because he worked with Premier Radio Networks out in LA.
Right.
And, they did the Jim Rome show, Dr. Laura, Casey Kasem, Rush Limbaugh, and they also ran Fox Sports Radio. Right. They leased the name Fox Sports from the Fox News Group, but it's Premier Radio Networks. And next thing I know, they're offering me a really nice chunk of change, almost doubled my salary if I came out there and worked for them. And I always wanted to live in LA, never really worked in radio. So that was a new experience for me. And, I knew that my time was limited at CNN. I was fortunate that they kept me. They kept 2 of us. And they let the other 28 go. So I went in and they wanted me to stay till 6 months. And I said, got to go. I got an opportunity I can't pass up. And I moved out to LA and I fell in love with the city, the palm trees, the weather, the energy, just loved everything about it. Radio really wasn't my gig. It was nice not having to wear a suit and tie and put on makeup. But it was a little different. It was a different monster, but it only took about a month to really transition for me. I was doing updates during the week, and on the weekend I hosted the Major League Baseball show with Kevin Kennedy. And then I hosted the NFL show. We had a rotating group. Jim Morris Sr. came in an awful lot. Marv Levy came in every once in a while. It was kind of an interesting group that we had. When we were on the main Fox lot, James Brown would come in when he got off the air after the final wrap up of the West Coast games. He'd come down and do like the last half hour with us. Bradshaw never came down, the dirty rat bastard. Love the guy to death though. Him and Howie never came down, but I was out there for about, like I said, for about 4 years, and then Denver called, and it was a chance to get back into television. And I had never worked for a regional. So I'd never covered just 2 teams. Now you're covering 2 leagues, of course, but you are covering 2 teams. And it was an eye-opening experience for me, because there is a part of you that wants to be a homer. I'm employed by the Avalanche and the Nuggets. They are writing my paycheck. I also work with them, and my job is 100 times easier when they win, because the players are in a good mood. The interviews are easier to get. When they score a lot, it makes the post-game show so much better. It gives you more material for the next pregame. Life is good when you win. And you want them to win for selfish reasons. You also want them to win for, business reasons and for economic reasons. And your viewership and ratings are going to go up if the team is winning, because there's more interest in them. More people in the stands make it for an exciting highlight. There's a million reasons why. And I went out there, and when I was at CNN, it was night and day than what it is now. CNN back then was and I don't want to say they're not legitimate now, but it was hardcore facts only, no opinions. Nowadays, you watch CNN or you watch Fox, and these anchors will give you a news story. They'll tell you something, and then they'll throw in a little snide comment afterwards. That you would get fired at CNN back in the day if you did something like that. They were solid journalism 101, and there was no stepping over any boundaries back then. The business has changed, and they all do it now, but back then, no way. So I came, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, do I do facts? Avalanche won the game 3-2. They outshot the Wild, or do I throw a little levity in there? And I know from gaining popularity with the way I did my voice, look, all the successful sportscasters, they all had their personality. They all had their personality, right? Nobody did it better and bigger than Chris Berman, and it's personality plus. The guys that are solid and do a solid job and buy the book and buy the numbers, you can count on them, but you'll never remember who they are. And the guys that have a little bit of personality and throw in a little wit, as long as they're not being a jerk, people enjoy that. People like them. And I just started rolling the dice. And I remember the radio TV writer in the Denver Post just crushed me. I don't know who this guy is. He's a homer and all that. And my boss said, don't listen to that idiot. He's just a grumpy old man. You just keep doing what you're doing, because we're the home. We're not ESPN doing an Avalanche game. We are the Avalanche TV network, and I'll never forget that. And I thought to myself, I don't care who you are. There are people that are not going to like you no matter what you do.
True.
That's just life. And there are other people that are going to love you, even if you're not good, just because you're representing their favorite team. So all I can do is be myself. And when the opportunity, Denver was not a good fit for me. The teams were fantastic. First year I go out there, the hockey's on strike, so it was just Nuggets.
Right.
And then year two, I mean, it was the second year of Carmelo Anthony's run out there, so they were a good squad. Geez, they went through 3 coaches in one season, and finally got George Karl. They make the playoffs, and they just kept losing to the Spurs every year. But then again, everybody lost to the Spurs or the Lakers there during that 10-year run. For sure. And then one of those two teams would lose to the other. So one of those two was always in the finals representing the West. That was the Shaq Kobe years and Duncan Robinson years. So they were powerhouses. The Nuggets were a really, really good team. They just weren't quite on that level. Sadly, the bosses out there, they were not experienced. They were not trustworthy. There were 3 guys. I don't want to name their names. I would never do that.
That's fine.
But when Stan Kroenke was taking bids to start his own network, because he figured, why not? I can make a ton of money if I had my own network and sold all the rights and sold all the advertising, instead of having somebody else do it for me. They literally came from the Houston area, and they took the budget from the 1986 HSE, which was the Houston Regional that did the Rockets and the Astros and stuff. And we're like, 1986? This is 2005. So they were like 40% lower than the 3 other bids. So Stan went with them. When we launched, we had one tape deck. I didn't even have a desk to sit at. I did a Nuggets half-hour pregame, halftime, and half-hour postgame without an analyst, without highlights, and without scoreboard. The only highlight we had was the truck would feed us the actual Nuggets highlights from that day, and we would record it on one tape deck. We couldn't even edit because we only had one tape deck. It would record and then play back the highlights. So in the postgame, I would show highlights of the game that we just watched. I could never show highlights from other games in action that night. And, that was where the radio experience came in, because I had to talk for 30 minutes by myself, not including the commercials. And, man, was that a challenge. And didn't even have a desk the first year. And there were, my executive producer, he didn't even know basic television terminology. And, we had very young people running camera and a lot of them in the control room. My director was good. The game people were experienced. The producers and that, they were top of the line. And they are still there, and they are fantastic people. But, because it was the pregame, they never had it, they threw it, and the director was good, but everybody else was like right out of college, and they didn't know anything, and they're taking the wrong camera, they're pointing it the wrong way, stuff's out of focus, I'm calling for a score, and they're putting up my name, and and after 2 years, it wasn't getting better, and I knew it wouldn't get better. And the Atlanta thing popped up, and I said, you know what? I don't want to live in the cold anymore. I don't know what the hell I was thinking going back to the cold. Grew up in the cold, couldn't stand it. Moved down south. Then I moved to LA where it's 85 and sunny every day with palm trees. Next thing I know, it's freezing cold in Denver. And Atlanta popped up. And because of the Avalanche connection, I got the Atlanta gig. And it was an opportunity for me to work with experienced people both during the game and in pregame. And we had a whole lot more equipment. We had it was like working at a legitimate sports network. And let me just put it this way. In my first 3 years, I won 3 Emmys. I won 8 Emmys in 11 years.
Wow.
Never would have happened if I stayed in Denver, no matter how good I was. It just wasn't going to happen. So it would be the difference between playing for like a last place team that's been in last place for 10 years. Remember how the Pirates struggled for 20 years? It'd be like playing for the Pirates for 2 years, and then all of a sudden, the Yankees say, "Hey, we want you to start," and you go into an organization that just spends and spends and spends, and next thing you know, you're in the World Series. It was night and day. It was just night and day, and there were good people back in Denver, a lot of good people, and made a lot of friends, and I wish them well. I was happy the Avs won that cup because I'm still friends with the producer of the game there. He texted me a picture of him in the locker room holding the Stanley Cup, and all the players were showering him with champagne. I thought, man, that's the greatest moment of your life next to your son being born. And he said, "You're exactly right." And I know the Nuggets game producer really well. He's still there, been doing it, grew up in Denver. He's been doing it for probably 30 years. Good man. And I know he's fingers crossed this year that they can get back to the Lakers. I'm rooting for him to get by the Lakers, for those people.
Right.
So, in Atlanta, 15 years, man. What can I tell you? When I started, Smoltz was still there with the Braves. So you had Smoltz and Chipper in that crew, and they started to fade out. Chipper was still there, but he was surrounded by a bunch of average players, and then Chipper retired, and they were bad for 2 or 3 years. They were bad. The question was, will this marquee franchise lose 100 games? And they came pretty darn close. They lost over 90 2 years in a row. That's when they had the Upton brothers, and it was not good.
Yeah, right.
And but what they wisely did was they wisely just sold off every decent veteran they had for draft picks, and they went from one of the worst minor league systems in the majors to one of the best. And then next thing you know, I mean, you see, they've won 5 divisions in a row in a World Series, so it paid off for them. So teams like the Braves and so forth, they're not going to be down long. Braves, Steelers, those kind of teams. They have good ownership. They have good management. Eventually, they're going to get where they need to be. It's just impossible to stay on top of it as long as they did. The Hawks have been a different story, but NBA games are a blast to work, man. It's high energy. I work with a ton of good people. Bob Rathman, one of the great play-by-play guys in the business, did the Tigers for I think a year or two.
Yep. Yeah, he did.
During the middle, it was like right after they got rid of Ernie, the dumbest decision they could have possibly made, and before they brought him back. And then Dominique was my analyst on pre and post for a year. Now he's the game analyst, and it's just I mean, even when the Hawks were bad, they were fun. And their first 8 years I was there, they made the playoffs every year. And then they struggled for a bit. They brought in Coach Budenholzer. Next thing you know, they win 60 games. They're battling LeBron for the Eastern Finals. And then they didn't sign a couple of guys, and Bud got mad. And so he left, and they struggled for a while. And now they got Trae Young and a couple of young guys around them. And they're not bad. That they're just not upper echelon,
All right. Well, you know what? Jerome, you drew a lot of people when you were there. So I got a couple drills I need you to take care of. If you say Jerome Jurenovich with 6 seconds, I can only imagine what Howard Schnellenberger would do with that big a name.
Yeah. You drag out Jurenovich, then you drag out headline. Just trying to keep your breath the entire time was a challenge. But they were fun jobs, a lot of jobs. I told you I wanted to tell you about a highlight of my first job in Erie.
Yeah, please do.
When I first started there as a cameraman, they didn't have cable in Erie yet. Their largest city. They didn't have cable till 1984. So they get cable, but most of the city still hadn't had it yet. You know how it is back when they were putting in cable. You had to wait 5 hours for the cable guy to show up, and then he never showed up. That's that's how it was back then. So we're at work, and I'm the weekend sportscaster. So I'm recording everything I can off of NBC, CBS, ABC, ESPN, MSG. I didn't care who it was. I mean, I showed more Islanders and Rangers highlights in Erie than I did Penguins because they were always on TV and I couldn't get the Pens. So I showed a ton of NBA. I love basketball. I showed a ton of NBA. And none of the other stations, you know, this ABC and NBC, the locals there, they didn't care about that stuff. You know, they would rather repeat a soundbite from a Friday night high school football game than show the Celtics 76ers game from earlier that day. I'm thinking this is nuts, you know? So, you know, I'm showing a ton. And I don't mean like 20 seconds per game. I'm going like 45, 50 seconds. I mean, if you're a sports fan, I was doing 8 to 10 minutes at 6 o'clock on Sunday night and another 10 for the 11. So the Pirates had fired their manager and they had hired Jim Leland. He was La Russa's third base coach with the White Sox. Well, you know, back in the 80s like that, you didn't have the internet. You had no way of knowing what Jim Leland looked like. If you guys remember the old baseball media guides, they'd have these little black and white photos of the assistant coaches in them. And we didn't have the American League because we covered the Pirates. So I had no idea what Jim Leland looked like. And Meadville, PA, hometown of Sharon Stone, tiny little town, you know, maybe 18,000 people, but they had a fantastic high school sports banquet. They would bring in Steelers and Pirates, Indians and Browns, and it was big time. And so Leland was supposed to come. They had just hired him. So my boss goes, hey, run down to Meadville. It's like 45 minutes away. He goes, run down to Meadville and try to get an interview, you know, just 1 or 2 sound bites with this Jim Leland guy about being the new manager. I said, okay. So I go walking in the front door. Everybody that walks in, they get handed a baseball. And I'm like, okay. And my cameraman takes one. I take one, shove it in my pocket. We walk in. Willie Stargell's there, Don Robinson, these guys. They're shaking hands. Their fingers are like cigars. I'm like, oh, my God. Talked to a couple of the players. And this one guy goes, I'm going to do you the biggest favor in your young career. And I go, what? He goes, you're the new guy that plays all the basketball highlights, right? I said, yeah. He goes, you're the only one that shows NBA. I love the NBA. He goes, go in the kitchen. And I go, what? He goes, just trust me. Go in the kitchen and wait there. So I look at my cameraman and I go in the kitchen, and it's like, you know, one of those New York kind of big places, you know, the doors that flapped as the waiters were going in and out with the trays. And I'm sitting in there going, my competition is out there getting interviews with Browns players, and, you know, I'm going to get fired. And within like 30 seconds, these 5 big Italian Goombas in these silk suits come walking in the back door. It's just out of The Sopranos, man. It was unbelievable. And who's behind them? Joe DiMaggio. They didn't even announce it. He was the surprise guest speaker. So there's Joe DiMaggio. And I looked at my camera, I go, turn that light on. I go, Mr. DiMaggio, can I ask you a few questions? He goes, sure, young man. He walks right up, pure class, just like everyone's always talked about him. I was so nervous. I called him Mr. DiMaggio on every question. They let me ask 5. Mr. DiMaggio, what do you think about George Steiner? Mr. You know, and he answered them all eloquently. And what was funny was after about the 3rd question, at the bottom of the screen, like where my fingers are right now, all you start seeing was ballpoint pens and baseballs. All the little kids knew we were in there, and they came running in the kitchen. They were holding up their balls and stuff. And Joe starts signing while he's talking to me. It was awesome. So one of the guys whispered in my ears, final question. And I nodded, yeah, sure. I asked him the 5th question, and I thanked him. And as he started walking away, I go, Mr. DiMaggio. I said, you know, members of the media aren't really supposed to ask for autographs, but I'm not at a stadium. And even if I were, I really frankly don't care because you are Joe DiMaggio. Would you sign my ball too? He goes, absolutely. Boom. And I shoved that ball in my pocket. It's in my safe upstairs. I mean, I've been on air for 6 months and I'm interviewing Joe DiMaggio in Meadville, PA, of all places. I mean, just a little cow town in Western PA. I couldn't believe it. I thought this is the greatest thing in the world. Who gets to interview Joe DiMaggio, you know, when you're 22 years old? It was great. It was just great. It was awesome.
Well, in the eyes of Will Vogel, that's an amazing story. Yeah, I know you got a kick out of what I sent you, Muhammad Ali at 19 years old, when I sent you that one.
Yeah.
Sugar Ray Leonard. But no, that's DiMaggio. See, so let's go to the chat room real quick. I want to continue. We have a lot of great stuff, and we're so happy to have you, Jerome.
Okay, my pleasure.
Your stories are unbelievable.
Before we go, I got to tell you the Bill McPhail story. It blows everybody away. If you're an NFL fan, you want me to tell you now? What the heck? Okay, so I told you Bill was the very first president of CBS Sports. And this was back, in the day when CBS was running the New York Giants, and they just sent it all over the country. Pete Rozelle he wasn't anywhere near the NFL at the time, right? So the AFL was just, NBC up in the Northeast. It really wasn't all that big of a deal yet. And Bill hired Frank Cherkinian, the legendary producer of the Masters. He hired Pat Summerall. He hired every big name that we grew up watching when we were very young. Every major sportscaster, Bill McPhail hired him. So Bill's telling me a story, and I'm reading this great book right now. It's about the 70s football, the Steelers and the Cowboys, and Tex Schramm. So Tex Schramm is general manager, PR director of the Rams, and he had a young man named Pete Rozelle working for him. And, the Rams struggle, whatever, and Tex Schramm gets fired. And Bill hires Tex because Bill, he knows all the NFL people. Doesn't know anybody in AFL. He hires Tex Schramm as the vice president of CBS Sports. Right. The only thing Tex Schramm knew at the time about TV was how to turn one on and turn one off. He didn't know anything about TV. But Bill's doing his buddy a favor, right? I mean, we all do it if we could. So Tex is working there, and Tex turned out to be a brilliant television negotiator on behalf of the NFL. He learned he was not a dummy by any means. I'm just saying he didn't have a TV background. So one day Tex Schramm comes in, or Bill goes up to Tex Schramm, and he goes, "Hey, Bill, there's an NFL banquet tonight. As the president of CBS Sports, I get invited to these things every day. I don't want to go. You're going to see a lot of your old friends. Why don't you go represent CBS, go to the banquet tonight?" Tex says, "Sure, I'd love to go." So Tex goes, and he sits at this table, and he's sitting next to a man who he knew of, but had never met personally. And the man at the time was the defensive coordinator of the New York Giants. And his name is Tom Landry. So about 3 months later, Tex Schramm walks into Bill's office and says, "Bill, I don't know how to say this to you. You hired me when I needed a job. You didn't need to hire me. You could have hired somebody more experienced. I'm eternally grateful, but I have an opportunity to go back into the NFL. They're starting a brand new franchise in Dallas, Texas, and they want me to run it." And Bill goes, "By all means, you got to go. That's the opportunity of a lifetime." Who's the first person Tex Schramm hires? Tom Landry. If Bill McPhail goes to that dinner that night instead of Tex Schramm never meets Tom Landry. And the history of the Dallas Cowboys and the NFL as we know it today is completely changed. All because Bill McPhail didn't want to go to dinner that night. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Now, that doesn't mean that Tex, maybe he would have hired him anyway through interviews or whatever. But the whole point was he spent all night sitting right next to him at the table, talking football, talking philosophy, talking life, and got to know the man. And as soon as he got the job, he goes, "I don't need to interview 5 people. I'm hiring Tom Landry." To me, that just blows me away. Just because Bill didn't want to go to dinner. That stuff's crazy.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you this, okay? When I covered the Super Bowl here in Miami, I had an opportunity to spend time with Tex Schramm, and we talked for a long time. He was so gracious with his time. It was ridiculous, this guy.
He was a PR guy, marketing guy at start. They always said he was great with the media. He always paid for the media to eat, whether they were on the road or home. He always took care of the tab for the media. And that's one of the ways you get favored coverage, right? You're a little less likely to crush them when they're losing if the guy's paying for your meals and you feel bad because you like him,
Yeah.
He was no dummy.
Well, you drew crowds at CNN, so now I got to take care of a couple things. We have a lot to talk about, and we'll stay on as long as you want to because we're just getting warmed up here. First of all, I'll let everybody know that the audio version of the Sports Exchange can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? Send topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com or do what you're doing. Participate in the chat room. If you want to advertise cost efficiently, call me at 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, having a blast with Jerome. Jurenovich. All right, Jerome. We got to go to the chat room because you got a lot of fans out here. The pundit says, "What's up, mentors? Just saying hi." And I grew up with Jerome Jurenovich on Headline Sports. So there you go, Jerome.
Yeah, I appreciate
we're not done yet. Will Vogel's one of the most active guys on the planet. Here's one of his favorite. Well, he'd love to have you on Basket Bros if you're available. But you know what? The main thing is, I'm falling in love with these stories. Join the club. I haven't kept quiet this long, and I don't mind yielding it to you when you come up with stuff like this. All right, we'll continue.
Wait till you guys hear the most embarrassing part of my career. And I'm not ashamed to tell it because it's so hilarious. But, you know, I thought my career was over when it happened. But I want you to keep going with what you're doing. And
we're going to do that. Hey, Jerome,
and
there's a reason.
I'll tell you that story. These guys will love it. Who's ever, men and women, who's ever, ladies, I don't want to be that way. Who's ever listening, male, female, I know you're all sports fans, and I'm sure you'll all appreciate it. It's embarrassing, but if you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at, right?
Oh, no, I'm with you. So Joshua Bernstein says, what's going on? All right, we got to go up the ladder, my friend Jerome. And you know what? After talking to you last week, I knew that we were only going to go with a solo show. And boy, my instincts were dead on. Jeremy B, we'll see you around night. But hello, gentlemen, Jeremy B. Now you're on with Jerome Jurenovich. All right, what else? And you know what?
Kneecap biting. What is kneecap biting about? That's what I want to know, man. Sounds like you got a dog or
that's his Detroit Lions, Campbell.
Oh,
yeah. Coach right. Campbell.
And one of Will Vogel's earlier ones, and then we're going to continue on. But he says, thank you for answering my first. I wanted to ask you, did you ever work with Dominique Wilkins? Well, you already
I worked with Dominique for 14 years, consider him a good friend. The first year that we launched Hawks Live, Grant Long, you Detroit people will remember Grant.
Right, yeah.
Grant was my analyst on the Hawks pre and post game and halftime. Year 2, it was Dominique. Then Dominique moved over to become the game analyst with Bob Rathman, and Mike the Stinger Glenn and I were teamed up for the last 13 years. Jeff Francoeur, I love that man as a brother. When my mother passed away back in 2015, he was the first person to call me. Worked with Frenchie. I was the sideline reporter for Frenchie's last 3 years with the club. When they traded him, I got the first interview with him outside the locker room, and I got the first interview with him as a member of the Atlanta media in New York. Tom Glavine, worked with him. He's been doing it about 4 years. He was doing it intermittently a little bit. Love Tommy G. You know what? I think Tom Glavine is brilliant on the air. His first year, he was a little on the soft side, didn't want to interrupt. Joe Simpson had a big personality, and Joe was used to doing it as a 2-man booth. All of a sudden there's a 3-man booth. Right. And, Tom had to learn when to interject and all that. First of all, Tom is incredibly intelligent when it comes to, well, first of all, he's a really smart guy. He was the lead player rep when they were on strike. Unfortunately, he's talking about that. He's a very smart individual, but his baseball intellect is remarkable. And, once they brought in Frenchie and moved Joe over to radio, Frenchie was more, they complemented each other very, very well. And Tom kind of came out of his shell. And I could listen to Tom Glavine call a baseball game 162 times a year. He's that good. He doesn't want to call that many games. A lot of these guys, they make pretty good money. They don't want to be, they travel for 20 years. Next thing you know, you don't want to start traveling again. So he does mostly home games, does a couple of road trips. But I worked with Glavine and Frenchie, and I love those guys, man. They're absolutely fantastic. Great. Just, one of the things about the Braves organization, and they don't suffer fools. Mm-hmm. If you're a good player, but you're a jerk, they will get rid of you. And they keep good people, and they treat good people well. And it's all a matter of respect. And, when you get to know people and like Chipper and Frenchie and Glavine and stuff, they're just, they're good people. They are really, really good people. They're from different parts of the country, different backgrounds. They've had tremendous athletic success, and with that became, great financial rewards. But it doesn't change who they are, and they don't big time you. They're just good dudes. That's like what we say in Pittsburgh. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
And that's what they are. And I you'll never hear me say a negative word about Glavin or Frenchie. I literally love Jeff Francoeur. I mean, he is just just a great person, man. Great guy.
All right. Well, you know what? You asked for it. You're going to get it now. So, all right. So we're going to go to and I got some great topics, Jerome. I'm so glad you got the energy. And I guarantee you one thing, I won't lose my voice with you taking the lion's share of all the. That's good.
Well,
you did it for a lot of years anyways.
All them years having to carry a show by myself for 30 minutes, I'm used to talking. They used to make us fill the rain delays. I'm so mad.
Hey,
one of
George,
my issues.
George, tell them what we did. Tell them you got to hear this one. George, tell them what we did for 6 hours on the Sports Exchange on a Saturday.
Saturday night from 6 till midnight.
Man.
And most of our signal, you talk about Lake Erie, most of our signal was going into Lake St. Clair. We were in a suburb of Detroit called Mount Clemens, Michigan. And we bartered the time. We got 6 hours. He wouldn't pay us a nickel, but he says, you fill these 6 hours, and then you also have to be the morning drive sportscaster Monday through Friday. Yeah, but you get to keep all your ad revenue. If you sell any ads, you get to keep all your revenue. So unfortunately, that only lasted about 2 years, and then we kind of walked away from it because it just wasn't producing the kind of revenue that we wanted. So,
yeah.
But you come up with features. Oh my God, we had Dick Vitale as our basketball analyst. We had Gary Vito, a friend of Mike Ilitch, to talk about softball. He was a softball manager, on and on. I mean, we had a bowling expert. We had a football expert. Roger Stanton and his wife Pam were on the show from Football News. It was a great show. And Scott and I, we certainly cut our teeth on that show with a fellow named Phil Guastella.
Yeah, we did. And think about it, Jerome, okay? We're in there for 6 hours broadcasting. Can you imagine the prep time that went in on that Saturday? I mean, it was unreal. But that's why it's just a blast when you and I and George are on the same show. People, for all you out there that are watching here on YouTube as well, there's a heck of a lot of experience amongst the three of us.
Oh, yeah.
It is so cool to listen to Jerome's story. So you asked for it. So now I'm really going to put you on the spot with this, Jerome. Okay, we'll talk about your biggest event highlights, and you asked for it. Tell me your most embarrassing moments in your career. That's a 3-part question, Jerome. Biggest events, highlights, and embarrassing moments in your career.
Well, the DiMaggio at the beginning was the highlight. Perhaps my favorite memory doesn't have anything to do with being in an actual broadcast. When I was working in Denver, there are a boatload of former major leaguers that live in the greater Denver area between Denver and Colorado Springs because they all love to hunt and fish. A couple former major league umpires as well. And one of the guys had a son that had an affliction. I can't remember for the life of me, which it wasn't Downs, but it was something similar. And he wanted to put together a charity baseball game. He came up to Denver and asked if we would do some advertising for it on our show. Said, absolutely. And next thing you know, he goes, hey, you want to play in it? And he asked me and 2 other members of the Denver media if we wanted to play. And I'm thinking, I played in many of these type events in Erie and in Atlanta. And it was always all the sportscasters, a couple news reporters, a couple camera guys, I go down there and there's me and one other sportscaster and everybody else is a former major leaguer. I remember Greg Brock, former Dodger.
I remember him.
It was cracking me up. These guys could all hit just like they could when first of all, Colorado Springs, you're way up there in the altitude. They are launching balls off the wall, but they couldn't run anymore. Their legs were shot. So they're launching balls in deep right center, hitting the wall on a fly, and it's a single to them because they can't run. So they made me play center field. I have a bad back, 2 bad knees. I'm like, oh my gosh. So he told me who was showing up. It was really cool. It was the year after the All-Star game in Houston. So they asked Major League Baseball, they sent us all the All-Star uniforms. and they asked, "Who's your favorite team?" So I said, "Well, I got a Pirates pillbox hat. I'll just bring it." So we got to wear the National League All-Star uniforms, the ones they used in batting practice, and then the other guys had the American League, and then we all had our own hat. And he told me Goose Gossage is going to show up. Goose is my favorite Yankee by far. I just loved hard throwing relievers like that, and he was with the Pirates for a year. He's phenomenal. So I have a Gossage Yankees jersey. So I brought it with me, and we're all sitting there, and these guys are slamming beers in the locker room. It's like a high school locker room practically. So we're just laughing and joking, And I said, Goose, I said, I don't know if this is the right time to show this or whatever, and I don't want to embarrass anybody else. I said, but I got this jersey. Would you sign it for me? He goes, oh, that's a Yankees jersey. I go, yeah. Why don't you turn it around? And he was genuinely touched that it was number 54, that it was his jersey. Right. He goes, I said, Goose, I said, man, I loved you with the Pirates. I did not want you to leave Pittsburgh. I lived in New York City for a brief summer in '84. I said, the day that Thurman's plane crashed, I kind of adopted the Yankees as my second favorite team. I love you. I love Guidry, Nettles, Randolph, even Reggie, Billy. I just was fascinated by you guys, man. And he goes, Jerome, I never wanted to leave Pittsburgh. He goes, the day I went in and talked, I can't remember who the GM's name was. He goes, my wife and I sat in the pickup truck when he told me they weren't going to match the Yankees offer, and I had to take the Yankees offer. It was, ridiculous back then compared to Pittsburgh's. He goes, we sat in my pickup truck in an empty parking lot outside Three River Stadium. My wife and I both cried. We love Pittsburgh so much. And I was like, wow. So we go out there to take BP before the game. And I go up there, the guys are just launching missiles, right? And but they're major leaguers, right? Former major leaguers, obviously, but still. So I go in the box, and all of a sudden I hear, "Hey, I'll throw to him." And Gossage gets on the hill, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I get, I know it's only BP, but I get the hit off Goose Gossage. How cool is this?" He goes, "Where do you want it?" And I said, "Belt tie fastball, middle of the plate." He goes, "Okay." He threw that ball so fast, fellas. It's in the glove, and I don't even know if I moved my arms. And I look back, and the catcher's looking at me through the mask and the umpire, and they're just laughing because they know that this kid who hasn't played ball since high school never saw anything like that, right? And Goose has this smirk, So he goes, "Okay, where do you want it?" I go, "Same spot, And he must have took a little off, And I just, through the grace of God, perfect contact, but I pulled it a little bit. It was a frozen rope screamer down the left field line, but it was foul by about 10 feet or so. And Goose actually snapped his head like, I can't believe he hit that ball. So I get in the box, and I'm waiting for another just juicy pitch in the middle of the plate. He freaking buzzed me. I went down. I'm like, oh my God, I'm laying in this. I got dirt all over me. And the catcher and the umpire are laughing. I look out at the mound, and Gossage is like doing a belly laugh. And I'm thinking to myself, this could be the greatest moment of my life. I just got dusted by Goose Gossage. I mean, how many people can say that? It's one thing to interview a guy. It's another thing to have him dust you in a game. Went 0 for 3 in a game because they had a different pitcher every inning. And those guys were all still throwing in high 80s, low 90s with movement. This lefty, I can't remember his name, pitched for the Mariners. He came out, he's throwing. I never saw a ball move like that. At least not right up in the box. And I ran my butt off that day because they were all just hitting. They were a lot of long singles, and all I did was chase. And it was just Mark Knudsen was the player that organized the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I would have kept a list of who all the players were. So that's my favorite moment. So DiMaggio is probably a career highlight. Getting dusted by Goose is maybe my favorite moment. I've been to the Olympics. I've been to 4 Super Bowls. I've been to 3 World Series. I've been to 3 baseball All-Star games, an NBA All-Star game, hockey All-Star game, Stanley Cup final. I've been to championship fight. The only thing I haven't been to a NASCAR race, never went to a NASCAR Indy race or Churchill Downs. Those are the only 3 big events I didn't go to. I didn't go to the Kentucky Derby. I didn't go to the Indy 500, and I never went to a NASCAR race. And other than that, I've done everything you could possibly do. I've had a blessed career. My embarrassing moment is one that every time I tell it, it brings out a couple chuckles. The cameras that we used to use back then, they're a lot different. Now they got this like 4 by 2 inch color screen. Well, back in the late 70s, early 80s, they were no different than those cheap VCR cameras that you could buy for your home. It was a little postage size black and white viewfinder, right? You're squinting, you're trying to see in this little black and white viewfinder, right? So I'm doing my interviews in the middle of the Steelers locker room after a game, big game. That's my first mistake. You're a young person. You want to learn something. When you interview an athlete, make sure he's standing in front of his locker. Never let him stand it with his back to the locker room. So, my camera guy is shooting video. I don't know what he sees in his viewfinder. I'm doing the interview. So I'm interviewing Stallworth and, I do Bradshaw, Stallworth, and Franco. And we get the heck out of there. And we didn't have news that night. So when we got back, we just put all the equipment, we just chucked it in there. And I said, I'll get it tomorrow. I'll come in an hour early and I'll put together a sports report before I have to go out and start doing the news for the day. So we had these little square black and white monitors, cheap little square black and white monitors, man. Let me tell you, they weren't much bigger than your iPhone. So, I'm in this booth and I'm, I voice it. I write what I think is, something that Bob Costas would be proud of. And, and I voice it and I start laying in the video highlights. And then there's, stop my track for a soundbite, more track, another soundbite. And I'm slapping this together. And because the monitors are so small, I'm focused on just what's in the middle of the screen, if it's matching what I'm saying.
Right.
And everything is going great. And next thing you know, I'm running behind. News is coming in. I got to edit all this stuff for news and at 6 o'clock, the news starts, and we're starting to wind down. And the Monday through Friday sports guy, he throws to my package, and I'm in the back room. I'm trying to clean up. I can't even watch it live, and I'm doing a million things. And all of a sudden, the phone rings. And, Erie Market 144, and nobody ever calls the news department to say, hey, that was a great story. You're going to run it again at 11.
Right.
And, one of the reporters, the assignment desk guy goes, hey, are you going to run that Steelers piece again at 11? I said, probably. And then next thing you know, the phones start ringing. We get another call. Then we get 2 or 3 other calls. It's like 5 people are calling, which is unheard of. Okay. And I don't really know why. And, everyone's saying, yeah, it's going to run again. It's going to run again. This female reporter. Yeah. Nobody knows. We're just telling the people, yes. And the news director comes out of his office, goes, hey, Jerome, did you do the Steelers piece? I said, yeah. He goes, hey, why don't you come on in here? I want to talk to you about it. Wow. And so I go walking in there, my chest puffed out like, dude, I am Chris Berman and Bob Costas. We got 5 calls in 2 minutes. I'm bigger than life. And I sit down on the chair, and he goes, let's watch your story together. And he's got this big 30-inch color monitor. So we put it in there. Starts out, Stallworth catching this TD pass. And then Stallworth catching a pass over the middle, and it's focused on John. Big game. And all of a sudden, here comes my first soundbite with John Stallworth. And he's in the middle of the locker room. And all of a sudden, I look, and behind him in the far wall is the offensive lineman. And there's a giant African-American and a giant white guy. And all they have on are their towels. They just got out of the showers. And their backs are to us. And I'm sitting there going, oh, my God, please no, please no. And whoosh, there go the towels. And it is bare moon rising, baby. We're talking all 4 cheeks. And I am like, oh, my God, these guys are mooning. This is what people wanted to see. And I just, I'm sitting there going, oh, my God, he's never going to let me do a story again. And the piece continues. And I'm thinking, oh, shh, Pikes. There's another John Stallworth soundbite coming up. And I'm just horrified. I am horrified. And here comes John. And the big offensive, the one guy had gotten out of the picture. and the big white offensive lineman is sitting there, and he's got the towel between his legs, hand in the front, hand in the back, and he's doing the floss. And I'm like, oh my Lord. I mean, it was horrendous. I mean, I don't even want to see myself do that when I get out of the shower, let alone a guy that's like 280 pounds in a locker room after a game. And it's all over the TV. It's going everywhere. That's why everybody was calling. They couldn't believe they saw we put naked Steeler offensive linemen on TV. And suffice it to say that I never put another report out on the air without watching it on at least, like a 16-inch color monitor. Never did that again. I never did that again. And not long after that, they went ahead and got upgraded monitors for all the edit bays, which they needed to do from the beginning.
So, Jerome, do you want to hear my Goose Gotcha story? By the way, you're really popular. The pundits they're giving you an invite to go on Sunday Night Basketball Bros on Sideline Sports. Sideline Sports happens to be a partner of ours, but I got to give you my Goose Gotcha story, okay? Back then, I was like 20 years old. You and I aren't that far away age-wise, so we're, parallels age-wise. Anyways, I got a tip from a friend of mine who was a sports anchor in Miami. He attempted to interview Goose Gotcha and got nothing but 1 or 2 word answers because Goose at that time didn't really want to talk to a lot of people. It was more reserved at that time. We're talking about, mind you, in the 80s. So I knew about this ahead. I said, listen, Goose, a friend of mine that's a local anchor said you didn't go ahead and give him very long answers. I get it. I totally understand it. But here's the deal. Okay, I got editors rubbing down my throat, and I can only ask you politely, please give me more than 2 or 3 word answers, or I'm going to ask you a lot more questions to get more out of you, because any good journalist is going to continue to go out there and probe. So if you want to make this interview shorter, make your answers a little bit longer. It gives me this interesting look. And actually, I put together representative stories that didn't consume much of his time that the editors were satisfied. I'm sure you probably run into situations where how do you make a lot of short answers and you have to go ahead and work through that. So, hey, guys,
there are just some guys. We had a reliever when I was the sideline reporter, Eric O'Flaherty, and he was the same way. He just didn't want to. He didn't like to do the interviews, so he just gave you 2 or 3 word answers. And whether he did it intentionally or that was his personality at the time, I just figured I'm not going back to him. He's not a starter. He did become a very predominant role player in our bullpen when our bullpen got good. When Craig Kimball was there, he was one of 3 guys, and him and Johnny Venters and Kimbrell, the 3 of them were like lights out. It was pretty phenomenal. But Eric, I just avoided Eric because it was boring. And now, what does he do now? He does a podcast with the Braves beat writer. It's like, really? You wouldn't talk to me for more than 3 words at a time. Now you're doing 30 minutes at a time? It's like,
Well, I've got one.
Like, who was it? Not Shannon Sharp, but Sterling Sharp. Wouldn't talk to the media when he's playing for the Packers. Wouldn't talk to the media. And then he becomes an ESPN analyst. I always thought I was always mad at ESPN for hiring. I don't know the man personally. I'm sure he's a nice guy. He actually was pretty good, but that's not the point. You did not want to cooperate with the media your entire career. Now you want to be a member of the media? I think that's very unfair. It's unfair to everybody that tried to cover you over the years.
I've got one that compares to what you just said. Ready? I'm covering the Tampa Tarpons, the Class A affiliate of the Reds at that time. And I know you've heard the name Chris Hammond, right?
Yeah, sure. I know Chris.
Well,
not well, but I know.
It was back then, so I'm sure he's a much different cat now. But he said, "I want to be like Carl. I don't want to talk to the media." I said, really? Okay. And I'm thinking, okay. I mean, I can't ask you to do what you want to do, but I would think in Class A you'd probably want to. If you get to the major leagues, I get it, but not here. And you know what? I politely said, okay, no problem. Don't want to inconvenience you. Left it at that. And I'm not one to hear and burn a bridge. I've never tried to do that, Jerome, at all. But I'm thinking a minor league guy wants to shun the media when you're just trying to get attention to build your brand.
Baseball players are it's been my experience, let's put it this way, the baseball players were always the worst. I always defended them because it's like an 8-month deal. I mean, they go down to spring training and the media's in the locker room every day. And then it's a 162 game season, and the media is in the locker room every day. And, you're around them, and, they want to stretch, they want to do their routine, and somebody, oh, can I stop? And I did learn over time that, especially if you're following the team on a daily basis, like we did, that if you go to Freddie Freeman on Monday and say, Freddie, I know you're getting ready to do your routine. Can you give me 3 minutes tomorrow or Wednesday? And he goes, yeah, I'll give it to you. And most of the guys will say yes, if you set it up in advance. But if they're running from just getting their stretching in or just getting iced or doing whatever, and they have to go out and do X, they don't want to stop to answer questions because they're in the middle of getting ready to do their job. So I kind of understand that. And there's people.
But this guy was a minor leaguer
every single day. No. I'm not excusing him. I'm just saying baseball players in general, you're there every day. With football, you're there on Sunday.
Right.
You're maybe there for 1 or 2 practices during the week, and that is it.
Right.
And the hockey guys, there's 2 or 3 beat guys, and that's really about it. The NBA guys, once they get to know you, they're pretty cool. They're probably to be. Hockey players are the best with the media.
Yes.
And when the NBA guys know you, when they get to know you, and they let their guard down, they're really cool. They're really
guys like that too. But the thing is, though, Jerome, I was working for the Tampa Tribune, not some weekly paper. And you remember the Tampa Tribune was a big newspaper back in the day until newspaper business got turned around. And yeah, you're right. Hockey players. Yeah, I don't have a lot of problem with both. In this situation, though, Jerome, it was kind of like that exception to the rule where it's a minor league player versus a major league player.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, coming up with this attitude, dude. You're in single A. You may not even make it to double A. I mean,
exactly. That was my point. Yeah. But regardless, I mean, it is, as a reporter, you have to accept what you're going to accept.
Yeah.
But that's where I found it pretty unique. But you know what? I'm going to tell you this, though, Jerome. I've made a lot of good friends in baseball, and I've had a lot. And I can tell you, if you follow a lot of the things I've done, you'll realize that, hey, this guy knows a whole lot. And as we get to Mickey Lola, just a little teaser because we're having a lot of fun. Stay tuned. We have a little more time there, Jerome.
I got to get going here in a minute or so. So why don't you do what you need me to do? How's that sound?
Well, I got to ask you one. Did you know Fred Hickman very well?
I knew Fred Hickman very, very well.
I figured you did, and of course we had him up in Detroit on the NBC affiliate for a couple of years. So
I worked with Fred I worked with Fred 15 years at CNN, and then he. When I came back to Atlanta about 2 years later, he joined us, and I was working with him again. That's when I was doing sidelines. He was hosting the pre and post game show.
Yeah.
And then he left to go down to New Orleans and then Baton Rouge, and then he went to the Black News Channel. And even after he left, we would talk on the phone probably twice a year.
Right,
and it was really, and you know what? He never told anybody he was sick. And I can't remember the last time I talked to him. And I remember telling my wife, I said, I haven't heard from Fred. I said, I wonder what's up with Fred Hickman. And what prompted that question was the Black News Channel said they were going to go out of business. And I said, I wonder what Fred's going to do, man. I said, I haven't heard from Fred in a while. And within just a week or two went by, and he had passed. I was stunned. I was stunned. Good dude.
Jerome, what I'm going to do with the rest of the show, is I'm going to go rapid fire because when I promoted.
Go rapid fire.
Oh yeah,
do it.
Do it. All right, we'll do it. All right. First of all, as George is getting to, let's talk about CNN Sports in its prime. Obviously, you had the opportunity to work with Hannah Storm, Nick Charles, and Fred Hickman. What was that like working with those particular individuals?
Nick and Fred were the cream of the crop. Nick and Fred were in a class by themselves in sportscasters. Among sportscasters, there was a time when Sports Tonight had much better ratings than SportsCenter at 11 o'clock. And that is why SportsCenter moved from 11:30 to 11, because sports fans were tuning in to Nick and Fred, and then they were going to bed because they had to go to work the next day. Why stay up an extra half an hour? They didn't need to. And first of all, nobody knew boxing and horse racing like Nick Charles. He was just phenomenal. Right. There's video, you could probably Google it. When you see Mike Tyson when he's arrested and he's in the Marion County prison and he's walking out, he's in a suit and tie, he's got his hands in his handcuffs with the overcoat over his, and he's walking through and all the cameras and lights are flashing. He stops and he looks at the camera and goes, "How you doing, Mr. Charles?" And he keeps going. That's respect. When Mike Tyson's arrested for rape and he stops in the middle of that to say hello to you. I mean, Nick was great and he was just superb at what he did. And he was just a really good human being. And I don't think there was a better presenter than Fred Hickman. Fred's the kind of guy that he didn't have to know what the heck he was talking about. He just sat there and smiled into that camera and made you feel like he was talking to you and you alone, and that he knew what he was talking about. When half the time he didn't, he would crack me up. I go, "Fred, that ain't right," you know. And he was one of those just naturally gifted television announcers,
right?
And we just funny. Man, CNN Sports back then was like a giant fraternity house. It was so much fun. And a lot of the stuff we did was probably politically incorrect. One thing we did was crazy. We gambled like crazy. We, amongst ourselves, we would throw $5 in a big can and everybody would pick out a name, whether who's going to be the MVP for the All-Star game, you know, who's going to win the US Open, every major golf event, anything big. We were throwing in money and picking out names and stuff. And, it was just amazing. I remember one time, Gary Miller, who went on to work at ESPN as well.
Right.
We were in this intense battle for. I used to play just baseball in one of those roto leagues, you know.
Oh yeah.
And we had a small league because it was just too intense. Everybody was working. I think we had 5 starters, 3 relievers. No, 3 starters, 2 relievers, and 5 position players. Didn't matter what position. Right. They just couldn't be the same position unless it was outfield. Like you couldn't have 5 first basemen because obviously that's a lot of power. So, and we had a baseball show on Saturday morning. Hal Bodley would fly in and be our analyst, you know. And whoever was playing the Braves, we'd send a car to pick up one of the star players from the visiting team to come in as a guest. And I remember coming in. It was Saturday morning, and we were playing the Reds. The Braves were playing the Reds. I was still at CNN at the time. And I come walking in, and Gary Miller's already there, and our desks were next to each other. I even got to, and I'm looking up at the monitors because we had 12 monitors up there, and they're showing highlights from all these games. And Miller goes, "How you doing?" And I said, "Those mother effing Reds, I'd like to kick every one of their asses." And Gary Miller goes, "Let me introduce you to Paul O'Neill. He's sitting right there and right behind me." I'm like, "Oh." I said, "Paul," he goes, "Don't worry, man."
My God.
And I'm like, how embarrassing was that? But it was a lot of fun. Dan Patrick and Gary Miller were our weekend people. And then Patrick went to ESPN. They hired Hannah Storm and Dan Hicks. That's how those two ended up getting married. They were sitting right next. They got hired at the same time. They were sitting all the way at the end of the department right next to each other. They were like 2 newbies, a new department, and they were great. Everybody liked both of them. You know, but because they were working together, same hour, same shift, and next thing you know, came one of those office romances, and now look at them. You know, they both had a great career.
Yeah, talk about Hannah Storm real quick, and then I have one more CNN question as we try to educate some students. Hannah Storm, obviously one of the finest people out there for sure. I'll tell you, I had the opportunity to see Leslie Visser recently and the Pioneers of Women, and Hannah Storm certainly to me is certainly somebody that I have so much respect for. Yeah.
Hannah and I used to have this little rivalry. She went to Notre Dame. I'm a huge Penn State guy. And it was so funny because Penn State's playing Notre Dame. It's November. It's late. Notre Dame is ranked number 1 in the country. And Penn State's there, you know, there's touchdown, Jesus. And Notre Dame's up 7-0. She walks by my desk and just looks over the shelf and gives me a little smirk. Next thing you know, it's 14-0. And she comes over. All of a sudden, she's patting me on the shoulder. "Oh, that's okay. Maybe your little Lions, you know, have a better day," this kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there, and I am just burning, man. I want to strangle her, you know. And then next thing you know, it's like 17-7 at the half, and she's over there gloating. And I'm getting ready to go on the air, and we're doing our gig, and I'm looking, and I am live on the air in a broadcast booth, and I'm looking through the window as I'm doing my spiel, and Penn State kicks a field goal as time expires to win 24-21. Notre Dame had never lost in South Bend in November when they were ranked number 1 until they lost. Paterno beat Holtz. I stopped broadcasting. I flung open that door and I started going, we are. And I ran over and I jumped up on Hannah's desk and I was jumping on her desk. Oh my gosh, she was ready to kill me. She was ready to kill me, but it was awesome. And people are like, Jerome, you're supposed to be on the air. And I'm like, I don't even care. It was
all right, so let's stay on the CNN theme, and then we have a few more I want to definitely get to, because I know a lot of people have been asking me to. I've had a lot of input going into this thing as we promoted it. So I guess I should ask, isn't it a shame that CNN Sports Tonight didn't last? Because I thought it was a formidable competitor with ESPN Sports Center. And you already stated that one was 11.
Headline, first of all, headlines was the breaks, the commercial breaks before and after that, minute 47 and 2:47 on the weekend, sold out all day, 24 hours a day. The only breaks that were completely sold out all the time. CNN Sports Tonight, very profitable. Our sports department was probably 1/5 the size of ESPN's at the time.
Really?
Maybe even smaller than that. I mean, we had like 90 people, but you think about ESPN, they got thousands up there, right? And we had quality people. From the on-air people to the producers to the editors, people were good. And we did great work. And it didn't go away because it was bad. And it didn't go away because it wasn't making money. It went away because Time Warner merged with CNN and everything was fine. The only people that really lost their jobs, CNN had a publishing branch. They got rid of that because obviously Time Warner was publishing, right? Between, Time, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, and all the hardcover stuff. And everything, it was a great merger. Everybody's getting along great. And then AOL bought it and they overpaid and they realized, they wanted to stream video and content. Right. And that's what everybody does now. We stream, right? But nobody was streaming in 2099 and 2000. So AOL was losing money just right down the toilet. And what does every company that has bad managers when they make bad decisions? What's the first thing they do? They get rid of people because that's their biggest expense. And they just sat there and they literally started laying off like crazy in the entire company. And it wasn't even belt tightening. And so they just said, we're a news organization. Why are we even doing sports? Let ESPN do sports. And so they just shut it down. And we went from, I think, 96 people to like 15. And they kept those 15 to cover Wimbledon, Kentucky Derby, Super Bowl, that kind of stuff. Big events, but not daily sportscasting. And I thought to myself, it's profitable.
Right.
You may not be making 20 million a year on sports. You may not be making 200 million. But if you're still making money, right?
Yep.
You're paying everybody's salaries, everybody's benefits, all the equipment, all the utilities, and you're still making money, and you get rid of it. Well, it was a stupid decision. But hey, look, our lives are filled with stupid decisions, from getting rid of Coke to new Coke, all that kind of. You know what I mean? You can go through it. You can go through a million like that.
Well, based on what you're saying, and we'll continue to move through them, I really lost my respect for ESPN as a news organization when they said Damara Hamlin was the only one, and they didn't mention that Chuck Hughes was a guy that died on the field, and the only ones at that station that got it right were Mike Wilbon and Antonio Kornheiser. But I'll leave that out there for people, because George and I happened to be at that game.
That's because these organizations nowadays, they all do it. When we were growing up, there were 3 networks, and then next thing you know, there was 4 networks, and then next thing you know, there was cable. So people started having 20 channels, and then 40, and then 60, and then DirecTV came in. You started having 200 channels, and now you got streaming, and you got everything in their mother. So the piece of the pie has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So the profits are lesser and lesser and lesser. And managers aren't going to take a pay cut. They don't do that. Stockholders don't want less. So what happens is the 25-year veteran producer gets replaced with a 3-year producer who doesn't understand. And I was at my last year at CNN. This young guy came up and goes, "Who is this Johnny Unitas?" I got to make a graphic for Johnny. I said, "Johnny Unitas." He didn't even know who Johnny Unitas was. And I mean, I've worked with guys that sat there and, you know, I'm in Atlanta, so they all love Andrew Jones down here. And I look, if Bill Mazeroski and Ozzie Smith are in the Hall of Fame and both deserve to be, so does Andrew Jones. You can't be in the Hall. You can't just put 300 game winner and 500 home run guys in there. Right. Andrew Jones's glove was the best in baseball for about a 15-year run. He was a dominant defensive center fielder, and ask any one of those 3 Cy Young Award winners that are in the Hall of Fame, and they will all tell you that he saved them many runs. He's a Hall of Famer. But these guys down here, oh, he's so much better than Willie Mays. You never saw Willie Mays. Willie Mays is the greatest baseball player in my lifetime. So I asked Bobby Cox. I said, "Bobby, just between me and you, we were just shooting shit one day, sitting there in the dugout. Nobody's around. It was out in San Francisco, actually. And we were talking about Barry Bonds, because I went and I stood up on that wall out there. And I said, Bobby, I looked out there. I said, that's a hell of a poke to put that ball in the bay out there. He goes, yeah, it is. I go, I said, say what you want. That's still pretty impressive when Bonds does it. He goes, yeah, but he has a little bit of help, Jerome. He's got a little bit of help. And that was Bobby's way of saying, we all know he's juicing, but what are you going to do? And then I said, Bobby, I've always wanted to ask you, as great as Andrew Jones was, I said, there is nobody that can compare. Junior Griffey was pretty close, but, who was Mays better? He goes, Mays was the best, Jerome. He goes, Andrew's good. And he's right behind him, just a smidge, but Mays was better. So I argue with these guys all the time. I say, you can love Andrew Jones and love the Atlanta Braves all you want, and you should. But if his own manager says Willie Mays was better and the greatest center fielder he's ever saw, what's that tell you?
Yeah, really.
So, and I love Andrew. He was the best defensive center fielder since Willie Mays. And there is no crime in shame. And I'll be the first to tell you, these people make a mistake. If you're going to put Harold Baines in the Hall of Fame, what the hell are you doing keeping Andrew Jones out? And Dale Murphy and Dave Parker. Come on, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? You lowered the bar. Come on. Don't get me started. I'll talk an hour.
No, I won't, because I got another 5 questions. I'll make sure you get to everyone.
Okay, let's get to everyone. I want to watch that third period of the Kraken and Stars, man. It's game 7.
That's okay. No problem. Hey, listen, we're enjoying our evening with you, and I know a lot of people, judging by Will Vogel mentions Don Mattingly. Don't get me started there, Will, even though Jerome has an opinion. I always thought Mattingly belongs in the whole.
I do too.
Okay, there you go, Will. There's your answer. The short Cliff Notes version. All right, so let's talk about today. How would you define sports journalism and media today with the emergence of podcasts, social media, etc.?
I think it's not as good as what it used to be. I think because the competition is so fierce, instead of rising to the level of the competition, people are too busy posting selfies on Instagram and Twitter and look at what I'm wearing and look at this and look at that. Give me the story. I don't care if you're an attractive female or an unattractive guy. Give me the story. Tell me why. What happened? Tell me why. Anybody can tell me that the Braves beat the Padres 5-3. I want to know what happened in that third inning to turn the game around. I want to know, was he looking fastball? Was it a mistake pitch? Tell me why. We don't get the why anymore. We get the look at me. The reporter is the story. The outrageous comments that you hear on these sports talk shows are the story. That ain't the story. Don't be making stuff up. You make it more difficult for the sincere and respectable journalists to do their job when you got to go in there and they're lumping you all together.
Amen.
So, sorry, it's gone downhill.
Amen. All right, next one. Do you feel you retired at the right time as access decreases for us in sports media, and how is retirement treating you?
I retired at the exact right time for me. My bosses were surprised when they came in. They said, we want to talk extension. We were on 2-year deals, and we usually waited until the end of the season. He approached me in July, and I needed back surgery at the end of the season, and I just had knee replacement. So I knew I was in a precarious position with my health. I was going to need a lot of time off. I didn't want to have to rush back. And because, when you got a bad back, it's not like having a bad knee or a bad shoulder. It's, you don't sleep right. You don't sit right. You're always uncomfortable. You're always grumpy. You're always in pain or discomfort. And 40 years of nights and weekends, the guys would get together and play cards around the corner. 2 or 3 couples would go listen to a local band on a Thursday night. Can't tell you how many weddings I have missed. I had to beg, borrow, and steal the last 2 times the Steelers were in the Super Bowl to go watch them play. I retired at 62. I could still be working. I missed the camaraderie of the men and women I worked with. That much fun. It was fun. It was a fun job. I don't miss the daily grind. I mean, I would spend 2 hours every morning watching Quick Pitch and then Sports Center, and then I'd be on the computer for an hour reading the out-of-town newspapers, and then doing my own stuff. And you get to the ball, you got to leave by 2 to get to the ballpark. You don't get home till 1. Then you do it all over again the next day, and it's time consuming. And after 40 years, I just said my passion for it isn't where it was. Now, if the Braves are up 5-1 and it's the 3rd inning, or if they're down 11-1 and I just turn it off and turn on HBO. I don't need to do it every day. It was fun, glad, and eternally grateful for the opportunity to my bosses presented me, and for the teams and the commitment they gave to me and the cooperation. But I had my run, man. It's time for those young guys. Let them have it. They can have it.
All right. Well, with that said, do you think COVID-19 led to a lot of the way things have gotten changed in today's media? For example, you have communication personnel, controlling the narrative and obviously micromanaging us.
Well, there were 2 big changes. First of all, when COVID happened, you couldn't get into the locker rooms, the NBA, you couldn't even get down into the tunnel. And the players all loved it because, you were beholden on the team to give you 1 player per game. Luckily in the NBA, it's usually 2 guys that were the stars. So, but with baseball, they were just giving you whoever. But it forced everybody to kind of hustle up and give a little extra effort. Now, the downside of it is companies like Bally, they decided they're not going to travel their truck people anymore. They used to always travel the director, the producer, sometimes the assistant director, the font person, and 5 people. And all of a sudden, Bally created this remote setup where they had to do their job in Atlanta, in the studios in Atlanta, when the Braves are playing, the Cubs at Wrigley. They're producing and directing that game from the room next to the newsroom. And, it's not real time. It's a split second or 2 delay. And I'm thinking, how you can't see the whole field. The announcers are in the other room announcing the game off of TV. They can't see what happened. The foul ball goes into the stands. They don't know who caught it, what happened. They don't know. There's a depth perception difference because you're not at the ballpark. And they had to do it that way during COVID. Then all of a sudden, Bally realized how much money they were saving. They implemented it full time. I'm like, that's no way to do a game. They just finally started traveling last year. I was like, man.
Yeah, I remember.
But that's the announcers. That was only the announcers. They were still holding the other people back.
Yeah, I cover the Marlins, so I know exactly where you're coming from there. All right. Well, you know what? You and I talked about this last week. So you have a great Mickey Lolich reference about the creation of the American Hall of Fame inaugural class of 2023. I know you.
Yeah.
I know you wanted to get this in, and I have one more, maybe one or possibly a second. But let's talk about Mickey Lolich, a guy who I think belongs in the Hall of Fame as well. This is your opportunity.
Mickey's cousin. I'm a Croatian American. And, we take pride in our heritage, much like everybody else, whether you're Italian, German, Irish, whatever, God bless us all. Respect to everybody. So for a tiny little country that's smaller than the city of Detroit, 800,000 people in the whole country, we have had tremendous success. Okay. My last year at CNN, they were a country for just 3 years, and they make it all the way to the semifinals before losing to eventual champion France. The last World Cup, they lost to France in the final. Goran Ivanisevic wins Wimbledon. When the Dream Team first started, they were the only team to lose to the Dream Team by less than 40 points. They took the silver medal that year. And, I mean, there are Croatian Americans scattered throughout the sports arenas, like there are, So here's Mickey Lulich, who was, I remember my mother, who loved baseball. Back then, the World Series was on during the day, and the nuns would drag a little black and white TV into the classroom and let us watch the World Series. And because the Croatian guy was pitching, everybody in the room was going nuts because, they were all Croatian kids there. And, so there's Fred Couples. His mother was Croatian. He considers himself a very proud Croatian. You have Nick Saban, the head coach at Alabama. You got Bill Belichick, the Patriots, very proud Croatians. Kevin McHale, you say the last name McHale, he's Croatian. Now, obviously the father's side is Irish, but he considers himself Croatian. And so they decided to start a sports hall of fame. And last September, they asked me to come up and MC the inaugural class. And those were members. We didn't put the two coaches in because they're still active. You have to be retired. So Roger Maris was Croatian. So Roger's son, Kevin, looks just like Roger's spitting image. It was kind of freaky because I'm sitting there and talking to him. He's sitting next to me the whole time. And he's probably Roger's age when Roger was playing with the Cardinals and just retired. And it's like sitting next to Roger. He looks that much like him, like his dad. But Mickey's cousin came and, Mickey's health isn't the greatest. So his cousin came and accepted the induction for him. But, they're going to do it every 2 years, and it's just a way of honoring people of Croatian descent. Mark Pavlich from the U.S. Men's Olympic team, another one of the inductees. So George Mikan, the first great center in pro basketball, Croatian. His granddaughter came. So it was a pretty storied class. I was pleasantly surprised. And we're going to do it about every 2 years. Yeah, so George, I know you guys are Detroiters, and I know how much you'll look. If you're our age and you're from Detroit, Mickey Lulich will have a special place in your heart for the rest of your life, right?
Oh, no, well, I had the opportunity to have him on the show before, and I met him over at his place in Southwest Florida. It was great. I know George works for the Polish Hall of Fame. Two last things, and one is John Morant. I mean, this to me, I don't know, is this a story you'd want to cover? I just can't stand it, to be honest with you.
Well, you don't have to be a genius to be a great athlete, okay? Somewhere along the line, somebody failed this young man. Yeah. And right now he is failing himself.
Right.
And far too often, and I don't know him, I don't know his specifics, but far too often great athletes get pushed aside and people have a tendency to look the other way when they do stuff that needs to be corrected.
Right.
And it happens at an early age. It happens in high school and then in college. And then next thing you know, you're 22, 24, 26, and you're a multimillionaire, and no one has told you no your whole life, And when you did stuff that you knew was wrong, that your mother or your grandmother would smack you for if they found out, but you got away with it when you were 15 and 16 and 18 and 20. And this isn't an African-American thing. Right. This could happen to any young man or woman that's an athlete of any color. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what your background is. You could be from a wealthy white family. If you don't get the proper upbringing and you don't understand the difference between right and wrong, look, he's already been suspended for this once. All right.
Right.
He had a run-in where he beat up some high school kid in his own backyard because the kid sassed him or something while they were playing basketball. Went in and got a gun, allegedly. Had an altercation at a mall. You just got suspended and you're doing the gun thing again, and you're doing it live on Instagram. It's not like somebody shot it on their cell phone when you weren't looking. You're promoting it. How stupid can you be?
Yeah, I know.
And I don't know what the NBA is going to do, but they're obviously going to suspend him, and rightly so. I mean, what do you do? I mean, come on, man. You're looking at like a $200 million contract coming up, and you're doing this bonehead stuff?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it were me, I'd suspend him a year and make him think about it.
I mean, what are you doing? I don't know. It's a shame, but, and he's the problem right now. Situations have, they rear their head every other year. Go back to Johnny Manziel. He had life right in front of him, threw it away. These are, people do. It's unfortunate. People do stupid things,
For
All
sure.
right, now we have one more question for the journalists, and then I'll let you get to the Kraken, okay? First of all, finally, can you give some advice for prospective young people getting in sports media, the business, broadcasting, and so forth?
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, the first thing that you absolutely have to do, whether you're just want to be a sports journalist or you just want to go medical, I don't care what your job is. Work hard. Work hard. Don't let anybody outwork you. Every producer I ever worked with said, Jerome, nobody outworked you. When the other guys were showing up at 4, I showed up at 3. When the other guys would leave as soon as 11:30 and the local news ended, I'd stay till 11:45, 11:50, looking at what I did, going over what I did, reviewing it, looking at did I do something wrong? Did I do something right? I recorded every pre and post game show I ever hosted. I only went back and watched the ones I knew I made a mistake to see how bad it was. Most times people wouldn't even notice it. Or to see if one of my coworkers made a mistake, what it looked like on TV as opposed to me sitting right next to them, and to see how I could have helped them prevent that mistake or guide them away from it. So outwork the competition. All right. It'll pay off in dividends. Number 2, be passionate about what you want, and then it won't really be work if you think about it. If you're a stat head, watch the games, learn the games. You have to understand the strategy of the sports that you're going to cover. And third and finally, and I think this is incredibly important, and it's often overlooked, you got to be yourself. Okay. I couldn't be Fred Hickman. I couldn't be Dan Patrick. I couldn't be Nick Trump. I had to be Jerome Jurenovich. When I was just reading scores, I was so vanilla and so boring. I wasn't any different than the wallpaper. But once I started being me, people understood who I was. And that's what separated me from the other 7 guys that did headline sports when I was doing it. And that's why they remembered me. And that's why every job I have, people still remember me. I got Braves and Hawks fans stopping me at the grocery store now. Or, I went and took my car in to get work done. The guy goes, aren't you the sports guy? And I said, yeah, I've been retired for about 1.5 years, 2 years. But yeah, I used to. He goes, yeah, man, you were really good. Why'd you quit? I said, because I'm old and I want to enjoy life. And my wife makes good money. He goes, shoot, man, I wish my wife made good money. So I could do it, but be yourself, because you can't be anybody else. And if you try to be somebody else, it's going to look fake. It's not going to be real. It's not going to be good. Be yourself. There's only one you. Be you.
Listen, Jerome, I've admired your work forever anyways. And I always tell students under me is not only be yourself, be different. If you can be different and come up with
don't be false. Be different. Don't be false.
Right.
And sometimes you got to find it. I fell into mine, but it'll happen. It will happen. And the best thing to do is record yourself and go back and listen and watch.
What?
Because you're going to be your worst critic. You're going to hate the way you look. You're going to hate the way you sound. And you're going to think, well, maybe I should have said it this way. I should put the emphasis on that. Maybe I shouldn't rush, and you'll get better. You'll get better because nobody else is going to, you're not going to have a coach sit next to you like you were in high school playing ball.
Right.
There's nobody going to tell you what you did wrong and what you did right. Your boss will yell at you if you screw up, but no one's going to sit there and go, hey, Jerome, come in here for 20 minutes. Let's look at your work and see if we can't make you better. They don't do that. You got to do it.
Well, when I say different, everybody can look for the obvious content. If you can find different content, then that falls into the other 3 things that you're saying. All right. So with that said, I'm going to go over a couple company things. I want to thank everybody for participating in the chat room. See, you're Jerome. You're popular all over the place. And we do thank you very much for being so gracious with your time. Let me take care of a few things really quickly. That the audio version of the Sports Exchange can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers and more. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? Getting in the chat rooms one way, or send your topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. If you want to advertise cost efficiently, give me a call, 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, check out our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. Candy Ebling does a remarkable job putting it together. And of course, you can find me at Tribune South. So, Jerome, I'm going to let George Eichhorn promote his book first, because this is going to pretty much be a good closing here for our show. We talk about the amount of experience in this show. I don't know how many shows you've done, but at least you've been on one tonight where you have each and every one of us at 40 years at least in the business. So, we're over the century mark in that category. So, George, why don't you let Jerome and everybody know about your book and then some?
Oh, yeah, no problem. I talked to a lot of the sportscasters, Jerome in Detroit, Ernie Harwell, Ray Lane, George Kell, Bud Lynch, Bruce Martin, the list goes on, and came up with the idea of a book called Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air. And it's a great picture book, easy to read. Scott is in the book as well. Scott did interviews with Muhammad Ali and with Jimmy Connors. There's pictures of Ted Williams being interviewed and Tiger Woods and on and on and on. So I'm very proud of this book. There's a link to purchase the book. You could go to eBay or Amazon, but you can also just click on the link that follows my column for the South Florida Tribune. I write for the Motor City Tribune in the South Florida Tribune website. And also you can reach me at Yahoo at gicorn@.com. I'm sorry, gicorn at yahoo.com. And of course, I am available on LinkedIn as well. So good to have you, Jerome. And it was a fun time tonight.
I appreciate it, fellas. Just want to leave you with the fact that Ernie Harwell, one of my favorite all-time announcers, had the distinct pleasure of introducing myself to him at the batting cage at the All-Star game in Milwaukee. Remember the infamous tie? And my producer, Eric Peterson, and I, we were working in LA at the time. So we go up and he would be on the show every once in a while. We all know who these people are, but they don't know who we are, And I went up and I said, Ernie, he had the little hat on, that little signature hat, And I said, Ernie, I just wanted to come up and shake your hand and introduce myself. I said, you've been on our show before. And I said, my name's Jerome Jurenovich with Fox Sports Radio. And he goes, Jerome, give me the CNN sign off. And I did the sign off for him, and he just laughed and we talked. And then when he walked away, my producer goes, does that ever get old? I said, are you kidding me? Ernie Harwell asking me that? Never gets old. Ernie Harwell. God rest him. What a great guy, man. Ernie Harwell, man. One of the voices of my youth.
Well, you know what? If Ernie Harwell's watching this up in heaven, he would be very proud of you and I and George for doing this thing, because he was like my uncle. And to me, every time I needed something, he was always there. I never asked him for money. I just needed time. And he was, whatever you want. I don't care. So he would be smiling in heaven over this broadcast.
Ernie Harwell. Good man. Good man.
So, Jerome, is there any particular thing that you want to promote on your own, charities or anything?
No, I'm good. I'm good right now. I will say this: I'm involved with dog rescues. So if you don't have a dog and you're able to, go to a shelter, get a dog out of there. It'll change your life. I know it's a responsibility, but the love that animal will return to you will be 1,000-fold. I can't implore enough people to rescue a pet. I am a dog fanatic. I am down to one. I've always had 3. They've gotten older, but got 2 more coming our way. I'm going to foster 2 that are coming in from the shelter. Right now they're getting their shots and dewormed and all that stuff. Supposed to get them on the 22nd. So rescue a pet and adopt a pet. It'll save a life. You'll feel so much better about yourself for that.
I've adopted 3 cats, so they're pretty.
Oh, there you go. Cat, dog, doesn't matter what it is, man.
Yeah,
they'll love on you.
So, Jerome, I can't tell you how much it's been a really delight to listen to all your stories. As evidence in the chat room, everybody was raving about it. So we thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
For taking the time out. So, with that said, this concludes this edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth. Pleased to be joined by my co-hosts, George Eichhorn and Jerome Jurenovich, a guy who I've admired forever. And at least it's been really a great opportunity to have JJ. I have to do this. JJ is dynamite. No, not Walker, by the way.
Oh my gosh.
Come on. Hey, you know what? I'm a journalist like you. I got to come up with these one-liners. So with that said, thanks again for joining us. Share this broadcast to everybody, because Jerome Jurenovich, to me, is a Hall of Fame broadcaster, but more importantly, you're a Hall of Fame person, Jerome, and I'm so pleased to share time with you and George tonight. It's been a real, truly great thrill to be around an esteemed colleague like you. You are really, really great. And to me, it's just been tremendously wonderful. And as you can tell, you got a couple requests to go on a few shows here. I don't know how that'll work. Don't even care at this point. I'm more concerned about if it's meant to happen, it is, but we're just so delayed that you were on ours. So, on behalf of George Icorn, Jerome Jurenovich, my name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Sports Exchange. Good evening, everybody, and catch you on the next episode.